This piece of code is also taken from the NetBeans project Append Prepend example, and it shows you how to prepend, that is, how to add at the front of a list. Again, we're getting the input from the keyboard, and we're going to end our input with a 0. In this case, we don't need a tail, and we start out with our head null. So we have a head, we just have nothing in there. And now we get some input from our keyboard. Let's imagine it's an 11. We check to make sure it's not 0. And if it isn't, we make a new node, we put our 11 in it, and then we give the address of that new node to temp. In other words, temp is going to be pointing to our new node that has an 11 in there. There we go. Then if head equals null, which it is, so head equals temp, I get the address of temp and I make that the address in head. In other words, temp was pointing to this new node, and therefore head is also going to point to this new node. Head is going to have the address of the new node. I'll miss the else, which takes me to the bottom of my loop. Get more input. Let's imagine it's a 7. Check. It's not a 0. Make myself a new node. Put the 7 in there. And what does it say? It says node temp equals new node. So temp now no longer points here, but it points to this new node because temp now has the address of this new node. Then if head is null, well, it isn't. Head has the address of the previous node. So I go to the else. Then temp.next equals head. So wherever head was pointing, temp.next now points there. So temp.next is this guy here. And temp.next now has to point to wherever head is pointing. In other words, here. After that, we say head equals temp. So head now points to wherever temp was pointing. Temp was pointing here, so head now points here instead of there. And if I just use an eraser and get rid of these, maybe I can see that a little better. I do have temp pointing to my last node I made, but I have head pointing to that node, and then that node now points to the one with the 11 in it. And now I'm at the end of my loop. And so I get more input. Let me say I get a 4. I'll check to make sure, check the top of my loop here to make sure that it wasn't a 0, and make myself a new node with a 4 in it. And that new node is pointed to by temp. So temp no longer points here. Instead, it points to this new one. Let me erase the old one. Okay, if head is null, which it isn't, so I'm at the else. Temp.next equals head. Head is pointing to this one with the 7 in it. So that is now where temp.next is pointing. Where is temp.next? Temp is the last one I made, so temp.next is here, and it needs to point to wherever head was pointing. And then head equals temp. Head points to where temp is now pointing. Temp is now pointing to this one with the 4 in it. So head now has to point to the one with the 4 in it. Let's get rid of this. Okay, so we have some sort of weird lines here, but let's try to make some sense of it. We've got head pointing to the 4, so we've got the head pointing to the one with the 4. The one with the 4 points to the one with the 7. The one with the 7 points to the one with the 11. Which is the end, because that's a null. And I had head pointing to the beginning. So this is what I've got. I first input an 11, and then a 7, and then a 4. So I kept adding to the beginning of my list. Head is pointing right here, so this is the beginning of my list, and I can go down my list. And then if the next thing I input is a 0, I'm not going to add any more nodes to this list, and I'm done.